Every generation has its leaders and teachers. They are the motivators, the manipulators, who change a defeat into victory. They are the dreamers and the planners of battles that divide brothers into rivals. They are the molders and shapers of destinies, turning boys into men. And they are bound together by one belief, a desire to create winners.
Bear Bryant was a savage guy. He was hard. I mean, at Maryland, he took the quarterback's hand, which was broken, and slammed it up against a wall to get it straightened out so he could play the second half.
I literally would walk across the street instead of meeting him on the sidewalk on that side of the street. I felt like he was more than just the coach or more than just a man.
At the age of 40, Bryant came to Texas A&M as the new coach of the Aggies. He was anxious to create a winner on his own terms after being forced from the spotlight at Maryland and Kentucky.
Bear Bryant arrived at Texas A&M February 8th, 1954, in a very bad mood. He had just left Kentucky, where things had not gone as he had hoped. He gets to A&M, he's got one of the worst football teams you've ever seen.
The Aggies had lost 11 games in their previous 2 seasons. To stir some support for the team, Bryant boasted to hundreds of students at a pep rally that we will win again. We must win again. Now, after months of planning, he decided to hold a summer training camp in Junction, Texas, almost 300 miles from the A&M campus.
He didn't know that Junction was in the kind of shape that it was in. I mean, it was a dust bowl, it was rattlesnakes, it was nothing but rocks and sand spurs, and when they got there, when they pulled through the gate, he almost got sick.
Paul Bear Bryant was born in Morrow Bottom, Arkansas on September 11th, 1913. While American women still marched for the right to vote. At 11 years old, after his father was disabled, he helped his mother sell vegetables from a horse-drawn carriage. Often ridiculed by other children for being so poor, Bryant was willing to wrestle even a carnival bear for money.
Bear got up on stage, and the muzzle came off the bear's nose and bit Bear on the side of the neck. And he starts bleeding, and he's trying to get away from the bear, and he jumps off the stage, almost breaks both of his legs, and takes off running. Well, he didn't get the dollar, but he got the nickname.
On August 31st, 1954, Bryant and 113 players on 2 buses rolled through the wooden gates of the Junction compound. Bryant had chosen the location to be as far as possible from the prying eyes of the alumni and press who might interfere with his way of running things. Its purpose, he said, was to find out right off who the players were and who the quitters were.
sounded like we're going to go to a camp and have a good time. And everything was going real well until about 4:30 the next morning when the whistle started blowing. We started getting up to hit the practice field by daylight.
There was a mountain right behind the cabin, or Quonset hut, where Bear Bryant stayed. And as soon as that sun popped over that ridge of that mountain, side straddle hops. Here we go. Practice started. 4 hours in the morning without breakfast. And then 4.5 hours in the afternoon until the sun goes down. I mean, he worked him like nobody ever worked anybody.
Even as the temperatures rose into the hundreds, Bryant had the team practice scrimmages, punt returns, and blocking in full gear. One of his most extreme tactics was not to allow players to drink water.
When you're on the field about 4 hours and it's over 100 degrees and you don't get a drink of water, you start having heat prostration, heat strokes, or whatever, just from lack of fluids. The thing of the day we looked forward to was getting in the showers after the workout, and most guys would even go in with their pads on just to try to cool down and get a drink of water. Coach Bryant was just lucky he didn't kill everyone.
Players that were injured were told to ignore their pain and play or pack up and leave. By the end of the third day, a dozen players had quit.
They left in the middle of the night, and they would either hitchhike or they would walk the 2 miles down to the bus station. A guy named Rob Roy Spiller, he was 18 years old, in fact, on his way to Texas A&M, ran the bus station. And he'd say, "Where do you boys want to go this morning?" And they'd say, "We don't care, first bus out."
On the sixth day, Billy Schroeder, a 200-pound tackle, was so overcome by the lack of water he simply collapsed on the field. In order to save his life, the local doctor packed his body in ice to allow it to cool.
I don't think I've really had too many thoughts about quitting. It was tough, but it really never crossed my mind to quit or leave. My parents wouldn't let me come home, so you better stick it out.
Halfback Billy Pete Huddleston, in his daily letter to his fiancée, never complained about the heat or the marathon days, only the lack of players. We're in deep trouble now. I have been able to count heads, but I'd bet we're down to about 40 boys. Finally, on September 9th, 10 days after it began, Bryant called it quits, telling a group of reporters, "Boys, it's been heaven on earth out here. We've been able to separate the quitters from the keepers, the turds from the champions."
They went with 113 players and went on 2 buses. They came back to College Station on 1 bus, half full, about 30 players, and really and truly 23 who were ready to start the season.
That year, after all of Bryant's work and all of the players' sacrifices, the Aggies only won 1 game. In his nearly 4 decades as a coach, that was to be Bryant's only losing season. Even after he had moved on to his extraordinary years in Alabama, those 4 years at Texas were never forgotten.
When Bear died, he had 2 rings on. One was his wedding ring, and the other was a 25-year commemorative ring that he had gotten from the team that went to Junction, his first team.
Now remember this, you can't get any more out of this game than you put into it. I want you to play football because you like it. If there's any fellow here who doesn't like football, I want him to turn in his suit and get away because he's wasting his time.
The most important figure of the 20th century in college football was Knute Rockne. He won national titles, and he made people who had no interest in college football care about college football.
The biggest thing about Knute Rockne is that he's the embodiment of the melting pot ideal. He was a high school dropout, and he went to Notre Dame, a Catholic school, because he heard that there was a better chance to get jobs on that campus, even for a Lutheran.
N-O-T-R-E-G-A-M-E, Notre Dame, Notre Dame, Notre Dame.
Upon entering Notre Dame in 1910, the Norwegian-born Knut Kenneth Rockne was a balding 22-year-old. Despite his boxer-like appearance, Rockne edited the school newspaper, mastered the flute, earned a degree in chemistry, and played on the football team. After assisting Coach Jesse Harper for 4 years, Rockne was named head football coach in 1918. At a time when reporters and editors were eager to fill their newspapers with stories of heroes, Rockne was more than happy to supply them with the legends.
The greatest day in the history of college football is probably October 18th, 1924. You had the Four Horsemen were born in New York by the way of Grantland Rice.
During a game between Notre Dame and Army at the Polo Grounds in 1924, Grantland Rice, a reporter for the New York Tribune, wrote, "Outlined against a blue-gray October sky, the Four Horsemen rode again. In dramatic lore, they are known as famine, pestilence, destruction, and death. These are only aliases. Their real names are Stuhldrayer, Miller, Crowley, and Layton."
The actual idea for the Four Horsemen lead came from a student named George Strickler. He had seen the film, the Rudolph Valentino film of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
At halftime, Strickler told Rice that he thought Notre Dame's backfield reminded him of the Four Horsemen in the way they charged out of the dust to defeat their opponents.
So Rice, like most reporters, shamelessly would steal anything at hand because he's got a deadline, he's got to get it out. And he types out, "Outlined against a blue-gray October sky, the Four Horsemen rode again."
As 55,000 fans watched Notre Dame defeat Army 13-7, George Strickler had one more idea: a photo of the Four Horsemen.
So it's a sort of wonderful conjunction of gee-whiz journalism, George Strickler having the right idea, Grantland Rice stealing it and being able to write the lead, and the public just embracing it.
When asked about the origin of the Four Horsemen, Rockne modestly stated, "How that came about is one of the most inscrutable achievements of coincidence, of which I know nothing save that it's rather a satisfying mouthful of words." Rockne always found a way to motivate his players. On November 10th, 1928, after a scoreless first half against Army, Rockne called the team together and told them about George Gipp.
4-7 by Abraham Lincoln, obviously, is the most famous and the greatest speech in the history of this country. But the second most famous was given on that Saturday in New York when he said, "Let's win one for the Gipper." I mean, everybody knows what win one for the Gipper means.
Gipp was an outstanding athlete who single-handedly led Notre Dame over Army in 1920. He was also known to drink and gamble a little too much. Tragically, Gipp died a few weeks after the game and reportedly told Rockne on his deathbed that when things are wrong and the brakes are beating the boys, tell them to go in there with all they've got and win one, just one, for the Gipper.
At halftime of that game against Army, Rockne mentions Gipp. He doesn't do the famous speech because that had not been written yet. That was written 2 years later by his ghostwriter. But he talks about Gipp and how about winning this game.
we're going inside them. We're going outside them. Inside them and outside them. And when we get them on the run once, we're going to keep them on the run.
Now, the people who knew Gip said the deathbed speech I imagine Gip would give would be, hey, Rock, when you got a sure thing, put a couple hundred down for me, because that was the real George Gip.
Real or imagined, spoken or unspoken, the words Rockne delivered to his players had one effect. It made them win, and they kept on winning. By 1930, his team had won 105 games and lost 12.
If you believe in reincarnation, Thomas Jefferson came back as Newt Rockne. Take the stadium. When he built the stadium, he left a lot of land around the stadium, and the good fathers at Notre Dame looked at this land and said, Newt, what is this for? He said, we're building this new stadium. We want to have space for parking. And the good fathers at Notre Dame said, Newt, nobody drives. And Newt Rockne said, they will, fathers, they will.
His reputation and fame had grown so large that on March 31st, 1931, he was on his way to Hollywood to make a movie about his life. But in an ironic twist of fate, he was killed in a plane crash 2 miles from the Kansas farm of his mentor, Jesse Harper. On a clear fall day in 1956, the Oklahoma Sooners trailed the Colorado Buffaloes by 13 points at halftime. With a 35-game winning streak on the line, Coach Bud Wilkinson needed to prompt his team into action.
And he's totally out of character. He says, take those jerseys off. Those jerseys mean tradition to the University of Oklahoma. Take them off. Well, they took them off. And he says, men, there's only one person in this stadium who believes you're going to win today. That person is me. Well, Billy Pricer, who's one of the toughest guys who ever lived, turns, and instead of opening the door, he starts ramming it. He knocks it off the runway, and here go the players running through this hole on their way out to the field without their jerseys. The coaches are having to yell, put your jerseys back on.
Final score, Oklahoma 27, Colorado 19. For all his players, Wilkinson's familiar motto rang true that day. If you are going to be a champion, you must be willing to pay a greater price than your opponent will ever pay. At the end of World War II, Oklahoma coach Jim Tatum persuaded Wilkinson to join his staff. Within a year, Tatum departed, and 31-year-old Wilkinson was the new coach.
The Grapes of Wrath image followed the state of Oklahoma into World War II, and after the war, they were looking for something to put Oklahoma people feeling good about themselves. And Wilkinson presented everything that perhaps the Oklahoma image was not. He was articulate, coat and tie image. He was a very handsome, tall, impressive-looking man. He made us feel that there was something worthwhile in the state.
Bud Wilkinson was so different from everyone else in his era in that he was a brain guy as opposed to a fist guy. It was more ballet than it really was hardcore football or wrestling. What he was doing was ballet in motion.
Down in the Sooner locker room, Wilkinson hung huge red and white signs to remind every player before they stepped onto the field to play like a champion.
He had these steely blue eyes and this wonderful smile, toothy smile. You couldn't help but listen to every word he said. And of course, then you go out and just play your heart out for this man.
If we ran a play and you didn't run it quite right, he'd call you back, and then he'd put his arm around you, and he'd say, watch this guy, watch him run this. And he's telling you what to do and how to do it, and boy, that just pumped the old adrenaline, and you're ready to go.
Beginning on October 10, 1953, Wilkinson led his Sooners on a winning rampage. After beating Texas 19-14 in their third game of the season, Oklahoma was unbeatable for the next 4 years. One reporter compared their winning streak to the dominance of the Imperial German Army and Standard Oil. After winning 47 straight games, Wilkinson and his team faced Notre Dame, who they had humbled 40-0 the previous season.
Here's the play of the game, and Sooner fans are shocked. Dick Lynch behind Pietrosanti's bone-crushing block sweeps into the end zone for a touchdown. Notre Dame snaps Oklahoma's 47-game winning streak and hands the Sooners their first shutout in 124 consecutive games.
You could see all the people crying and sobbing, and, you know, the world had come to an end. Bud went over, shook the coach's hand, and just walked off. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, he walked off. I'm quite sure he felt it, but you'd never know that. And he said, hey, that game is over. Let's get ready to play the next week. That's the kind of person that he was.
Under Wilkinson, Oklahoma would end the decade having lost only 10 games. His only major defeat would occur outside the gridiron, when in 1964, he lost his bid for the United States Senate seat. Wilkinson's philosophy in life was simple. A man who tried his best and failed is superior to the man who never tried. In 1890, Amos Alonzo Stagg faced the toughest decision of his young life. He was torn between a vocation as a minister or a career as a football coach. Already an All-American on Yale's football team, Stagg had just completed a year's study at Yale Divinity School.
And he would go out and make speeches during the spring and summer. And he was horrible, absolutely horrible. So he agonized, anguished all summer long. All of this has been for nothing. And the thought came in that he could serve his master. He could be a minister by being a football coach.
Amos Alonzo Stagg was born on August 16, 1862, in West Orange, New Jersey, 14 days before the Second Battle of Bull Run. The fifth of 8 children, he was a gifted athlete who turned down several offers to pitch professional baseball.
Stagg to American college football was Washington to American politics. I mean, much of what we know now to be the heart and guts of the game, somehow you could trace back to Amos Alonzo Stagg. I mean, the huddle, for example, the T formation, things like that. He was constantly inventing.
In 1892, Stagg was appointed as the first director of physical culture and athletics at the University of Chicago. On the 1st of October, Stagg sent out his call for football players. 13 students showed up, forcing him to name himself captain of the team.
Chicago was virgin territory. No one had really shown Chicagoans what this game of football was about. In fact, during the time that he took that gridiron message west, the newspapers very openly and literally called him the football missionary, and the gospel of the gridiron comes to Chicago.
Football was still ruled by the belief that the team that was the biggest and the strongest would win. A mass play placed the man with the ball in the center of a wedge that ran down the field, knocking down opposing players like tin pins.
So linemen would literally box with each other. It was like 7 tough man contests going on with each snap of the ball. And what Stagg believed would take care of this was by allowing the ball to be thrown forward.
He perfected the man in motion, developed a backfield shift, and created over 64 pass plays. After 2 successful seasons, Stagg wanted to put his team on the national map. Scheduling games against the powerhouses of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton did little to further his school's reputation.
Stagg goes to his boss, President Harper, and said, "I've got this idea. I'd like to take my boys on a train trip, not east, 800 miles east, but 2,200 miles west and down the coast of California. My old mentor, Camp, is now the coach at Stanford, and we'd like to play some football."
On a sunny Christmas afternoon, Stagg's Maroons beat Stanford 24-4. Camp demanded a rematch a few days later, and the 2 teams met again in Los Angeles.
Chicago and Stanford play a game of football at the New Year in the sunshine of Southern California, far from either campus, for no ostensible educational reason, only for the gate receipts and the publicity. So the Rose Bowl really should give obeisance to Stagg for inventing that idea almost 10 years before the Rose Bowl itself says it was founded.
Stagg demanded unwavering discipline. His players were required to sign a contract forcing them to abstain from drinking, smoking, and gambling. He even had special chimes installed in the clock tower to alert them of their 11 o'clock curfew.
Imagine a 40-year-old man being referred to on a campus as the old man.
By 1913, the Maroons had won their 5th Big Ten championship, and Stagg continued to innovate, developing numbered uniforms, varsity letters, and even knit pants for his players. Football teams across the country learned the game from the gospel of Stagg. He was proclaimed the Dean of Western football. Even as Stagg's approach to the game was spreading throughout the country, he was forced to retire from Chicago in 1932, the victim of the school's de-emphasis of the game. A few months later, he became the coach at the University of Pacific and continued coaching until he was 90 years old.
When he was living out his days in Stockton, he would cut his grass with a hand mower. And then kids would come in the afternoon and tear it up playing football. Finally, a neighbor leaned over the fence one day and said, "Mr. Stagg, I don't understand this." He said, "I see you out here working so hard on your grass, and then you let these kids come in and mess it up every day." And Stagg said, "Sir," he says, "I'm not raising grass, I'm raising boys."
He raises millions and millions of dollars and lives in the same home. Has his phone number listed. I mean, he is not a football coach. I mean, he could be a governor, he'd be running for president.
There have been programs that have come and gone and had flash and glitter and won some games. But his program has remained consistent throughout that, and he has remained consistent to his principles and the ideals of college football.
I've never really just wanted to be a coach. And when I told my dad that I was going to do everything I could to become the best coach I could become and hopefully have a good career, and he said, "But whatever you do, don't leave any place without having made an impact on it."
Joseph Paterno was born in Brooklyn, New York on December 21st, 1926. The son of a New York Supreme Court clerk, he graduated from Brown University in 1950 with all intentions of becoming a lawyer. But his plans were quickly altered when Coach Rip Engel asked him to become his assistant at Penn State.
I was a pain in the backside when I first came. I had all the answers, even though I didn't know a darn thing about coaching.
In 1966, after working as an assistant for 15 years, Paterno took over as head coach. Immediately, he wanted to redefine the importance of academics in the lives of his athletes. He called it his grand experiment.
My idea was, hey, we were going to go without that stereotype jock, the animal house. No, that was not going to be the way. We were going to play, and we were going to knock people down, and we were going to pick them up, and we were going to have some class, and we were going to go to class, and we were going to graduate.
I think why Joe can stay in the game where others probably couldn't is because he's in the game for different reasons. He likes to win football games, but he's an educator first. And I think because of that, he never loses.
Let him out if you want.
Most people will tell you, even the guys that had a difficult time with Joe in their simple 4 years at Penn State, look back and say, you know, the lessons that I was told, I tell my kids now.
In 1979, after winning 22 games and losing just one in 2 seasons, Paterno faced Bear Bryant and Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. It would turn out to be one of Paterno's most trying moments.
Humphries had a pretty good day punting, had one bad one for 9 yards. Oh, it bounded back to it. And he gets another ball out of there.
And they shanked the punt. Shanked it out of bounds inside their 30-yard line. And we still had a minute something to go in the ball game.
And the flag thrown way back upfield by the back judge. Would you believe there are 12 men on the field? Who? By Penn State. Oh, hello. And that is 15 yards.
So we played with 12 guys, which gave them a 15-yard penalty first down. We have no more timeouts left.
Joe is going to be turned aside one more time. As he hunts elusive number 1. That's your last play of the ball game. It is over. Alabama has defeated Penn State.
They run out the clock. So I felt I really let the football team down.
3 years later, Paterno's grand experiment was completed.
Lions have got a drive going here, a time-consuming effort, too. But now Blackledge is going to put it up on first down. He's going for the bundle. Garrity! Touchdown!
Penn State beat Georgia 27-23 in the Sugar Bowl. They were the undisputed national champions.
It was great for the state of Pennsylvania. It was great for Penn State. But I really, you know, it was one of those things that you wanted to see happen. When it happened, and, you know, like eating an ice cream cone, you know, you look forward to it. When it's gone, it's gone.
Paterno has coached at Penn State for over 35 years and has won over 300 games. His teams have had 7 undefeated seasons, and they have won 2 national championships. But he is most proud of the students who have graduated through his program.
He was asked in 1973, when he had one of his undefeated teams, if this was his best team. And his answer was, we'll know how successful this team has been in about 25 years, because then we'll find out what kind of people they turned out to be. They had a reunion in 1998, and a friend of Paterno's brought that up to him, and Paterno smiled and said, yeah, looked around the room and said, I guess we can call this a successful group.
In 1903, the Carlisle Indian School faced off against a Harvard team that had shut out 6 of their previous 8 opponents. Carlisle was a government school whose mission was to school Indians in American ways. With the game scoreless after the first half, Carlisle coach Glenn Warner called for the hidden ball play.
Harvard was always a big nemesis of his because he always felt like they were the establishment. And he always wanted to be able to prove to his players that they could keep up with and compete against that. So he would always try to level the playing field a little bit by coming up with something sneaky.
At the 5-yard line, the Carlisle players gathered around an individual called the Hunchback. Warner had secretly sewn elastic into the Hunchback's jersey, allowing the ball to be placed in his shirt. As the quarterback yelled, "Go!" The entire team headed for the goal line, each hugging his helmet to his chest.
The guys coming the other way had no idea, because nobody could see a football. The hunchback player at that time went straight up the field. He was untouched, and it really shocked the Harvard people.
Late in the half, Harvard scored 2 touchdowns to win 12-11, but the damage had been done. Tiny Carlisle had fooled one of the nation's greatest teams. A few seasons later, Warner's hidden ball play was permanently outlawed. Glenn Scobie Warner was born in Springville, New York on April 5th, 1871, less than 2 years after the first college football game. Even though he pitched semi-pro baseball as a teenager, a future in athletics did not seem to be in the making. By the age of 22, he was broke, having gambled away all his savings betting on horses.
He wired his dad and said, "Dad, I've decided to go to law school at Cornell." And while on the train going to Cornell, he happened to meet the gentleman that was going to be coaching the football team. The guy asked him to come out for football when he got there, which he did, and made the team the first day.
Nicknamed Pop by his fellow students because of his advanced age, Warner would nonetheless excel in football, track, and boxing. After graduating and finding little success as a lawyer, Warner returned to athletics. He coached football at Iowa, Georgia, and finally settled at Carlisle in 1899. Although physically lacking, Warner found players with a tremendous spirit and a desire to test the conventions of the game. His attention immediately focused on Jim Thorpe, a Sac and Fox Indian with a gift for speed. With Thorpe as his lead man, Warner created plays that relied on sleight of hand to beat his opponents.
Thorpe was outstanding. There was nobody as good as him. He was a powerful runner, a great kicker. He could pass the football when he had to. You brought him together with Pop Warner, who was one of the great innovators of the game. You brought them together, and Carlisle suddenly had a football team that was really good.
One writer noting Carlisle's new prominence stated, "The Indians are no longer considered as mere practice for the Big 11." After the closing of Carlisle, Warner returned to his vagabond ways. He brought 2 national championships to Pittsburgh, 1 national championship and 3 Rose Bowl appearances to Stanford. And finally for Temple, an appearance in the first Sugar Bowl in 1935. In his 44-year coaching career, Warner would win a total of 319 games, a record for most victories that would stand until Paul Bear Bryant broke it in 1982.
Pop Warner was always able to create new plays, which always kept the defensive people off balance. And I think that pretty much sums up Pop Warner's entire life, always trying to find an advantage over the guy he was competing against.
On a stormy winter evening in 1934, 12 top coaches were invited to speak to a youth football league in Philadelphia. As travel conditions worsened, every coach except one canceled. 30 minutes late, and a cane in his hand, 63-year-old Pop Warner walked on stage. For the next few hours, he dazzled the audience with stories and insights into the game. To honor Warner's support for their fledgling organization, they renamed it the Pop Warner Football Conference. Today, there are Pop Warner leagues in over 35 states and 2 foreign countries.
Bradman got the reputation as the Notre Dame of black college football, and in large part it was due to Eddie Robinson.
He says, I try to get a piece of every boy that plays for me, and I try to give him a piece of me if it's worth anything.
Not that we didn't have fathers at home, but he understood that you was at Grambling. It was his responsibility to steer you in the right direction.
Edward Gay Robinson was born on February the 13th, 1919, in Jackson, Louisiana, 1 month before the start of Prohibition. The son of a third-generation sharecropper, Robinson found his inspiration to become a coach in the 4th grade.
When the local high school coach brought his team over one day, and he watched how he handled his players and how he talked with the kids, and he liked that. And he said he knew from that point that he wanted to be a coach.
Coaching is the most rewarding profession in the world, and no man is too good to coach the American youth.
In 1941, Robinson was a 22-year-old college graduate working in a feed mill in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The former star quarterback was looking for a new job when the Louisiana Negro Normal and Industrial Institute announced they needed a new football coach. For $64 a month, Robinson mowed and lined the field, sewed torn uniforms, directed the band, and wrote stories for the local papers. His first team only won 3 games. But by the next season, the Tigers were 8-0 and unscored.
He took a special interest in the young men. He went to the dormitories with his bell, and he woke them up and made sure they ate, and then they went to class. And he would say, meet one on the street, and he'd say, well, you are supposed to be in class right now. Well, Coach, I couldn't make, oh, no, you have to go to class.
You're going to have to block him. We practice each day. You got to block him, and you got to stay with him. You can't block him and turn around.
Never heard the man curse in my life. I was there 5 years with a red shirt year. I never heard him say nothing but damn it.
This is what you've been waiting for. This is the opportunity you need to knock this team off. I hope you read the papers this morning. Did nobody pick you?
Coach Robinson's halftime speech would consist of him going on and on about how, oh, you don't love Grambling, you don't love Grambling, you're not playing hard. And he would start crying. I mean, he would, he'd have tears streaming down his face about how you don't love Grambling.
For the next 3 decades, through the civil rights marches, the Vietnam War, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Eddie Robinson coached at Grambling.
Grambling took its product outside of the South. They played in Chicago, they played in New York, they played in Los Angeles, they played in Houston. They took their program around the country and exposed it to everybody.
By October 5th, 1985, he had won 323 games, tying a record set by Bear Bryant for the most wins.
The fact that Eddie Robinson broke such a revered record by such a revered coach gave a lot of credibility, I think, not only to Coach Robinson and his career, but to black college football and the types of players that it turned out.
When asked what he thought about breaking Bryant's record, Robinson replied, I've never thought about the records. I've just thought about the kids. When they come out of Grambling, they have my signature on them. They aren't the English teacher's kids or the math teacher's kids. They are Eddie's boys, and I'll try to make them better than average.
He says, I really don't think you can be a good coach unless you love them. And he really believes that, and it's reflected. Heck, he has over 200 guys that played in the NFL, and more important than that, he has doctors and lawyers and teachers, people that have been tremendous successes in the world.
In 1997, after coaching 588 games and winning 408, Robinson retired from football.
Florida State had lost, I think, 22 games in a row. They were a laughingstock. That's where Florida State was when Bobby Bowden took over in 1976.
On Monday, January the 12th, Robert Klecker Bowden was named Florida State University's 8th head coach in its 28-year history. Bobby Bowden described his relationship to Florida State as a marriage, determined to let no man put it asunder.
So when the opportunity came to go to Florida State, it's not like I jumped on it, because I nearly turned it down 2 or 3 times. We kind of Ann and I at the last moment said, let's go to Florida State.
He beat 5 teams in his first year and lost to 6. It would be his only losing season with the Seminoles. As the rebuilding process commenced, Bowden began with a pilgrimage.
Bobby Bowden took Florida State and went on the road. He went to Lincoln and he beat Nebraska. He went to Notre Dame and he beat Notre Dame. He went wherever he could get a game with somebody and beat them.
Midway through the 1981 season, Florida State began a road trip on September 19th and ended 5 weeks later at Nebraska, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and finally Louisiana State. The wary Seminoles won 3 of those games.
He went anywhere and he'd play anybody. And he wasn't scared of that. He understood that's what he had to do to get attention, and he understood that he was good enough or could make his team good enough that they could play on equal terms with those guys.
By the mid-'80s, Bowden's persistence and risk-taking resulted in wins. The combination of size and speed gave the Seminoles the firepower to fuel their high-octane attack.
Philosophically, as a coach, what kind of football does he believe in? Score, score, score. Bobby Bowden is offensive football.
He's such an innovative coach. I mean, he wins games sometimes with sheer audacity. He'll come out and do things, quick kicks and 4th down passes and end arounds and tackle eligibles and all those things that innovative coaches have thought up over the years. Bobby Bowden flat out does.
By the end of the 80s, Florida State was no longer a contender. They were a powerhouse.
And then beginning in 1987, they embarked on a 14-year run that we've never seen before. To be in the top 4 for that amount of time every single year is astounding.
But Bowden's legacy transcends Florida State. The X's and O's are in his blood, literally. 2 of his sons, Tommy and Terry, have become college football head coaches of their own.
Tommy and I, pretty much 13 or 14, we both felt like we were going to be coaches. We saw a very, very positive side of coaching, and maybe that's why we all wanted to go into it.
Tommy is the only one that kind of hinted early in his, even high school, that he wanted to be a coach, you know. Terry got a law degree. I thought sure he was going into law. But opportunities came and they couldn't turn it down. They wanted to coach.
On October 23rd, 1999, Florida State traveled north to face conference rival Clemson. But it was more than a conference game. It was the first time father would play son in college football history.
People talked about being a backyard brawl or a family feud. Hey, there was no love lost on that one, I promise you. People saw my mother in the stands with a sweater that had half garnet and gold and half orange, and they said, well, she's for both teams. She was for her husband. She was for my dad because she didn't want the little boy to beat the dad. Here was Tommy turning the Clemson program around, coaching against my father, who, if he won that game, not only would he remain undefeated and have a chance to win a national championship, but he would have a chance to become one of the top 4 or 5 coaches in history to win their 300th game.
The Florida State Seminoles, the #1 team in the land, have pulled off the victory, and for Bobby Bowden, win number 300.
Bobby prevailed, his name forever etched into football immortality. Paul Bear Bryant, Glenn Pop Warner, Amos Alonzo Stagg, Joe Paterno, and finally, Bobby Bowden.
When I'm through, and if I had a legacy, is that, well, Bobby Bowden was one of the best football coaches we've ever had. That's what I like. You don't have to say the best. He's one of the best we ever had, and he didn't cheat. He did not cheat. He did it honestly, and he tried to help his young men become better people. That's all I can ask for, really.